4 drivers, 1 championship, and they could all win it going into the final race of the season. The first time in history 4 drivers could win at the final race and all be crowned Drivers' World Champion. And who was going to take it was anyone's guess. Let's briefly take a step back and head over to the 2009 winter break, where this story starts. The year is 2009 and F1 has just had a new regulation change, a new Constructors' Champion and new Drivers' Champion of Brawn and Jenson Button. Now, these regulations have been improved upon, and the main important detail is that refueling mid-race has been banned. But going into this season, the Constructors' Champion of Brawn could not continue, and they had to sell their team to Mercedes. Red Bull had just come off the back of their breakthrough season, and McLaren and Ferrari were hoping for a bit of redemption, coming off both of their seasons being pretty dreadful in 2009. This meant there was driver changes, team changes, and quite a lot of speculation on who would be fastest on the grid.
I want a one-word answer very quickly. The Constructors' World Champion, Jonathan.
I've gone for McLaren.
Ferrari.
McLaren.
Red Bull.
Let's talk about the drivers as well.
Fernando Alonso.
Okay.
Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Oh, go on. Come on.
Sebastian Vettel.
McLaren with the 2 most recent F1 World Champions, with Jenson Button lining up with his teammate Lewis Hamilton. Ferrari with the 2-time World Champion of Fernando Alonso, with the so close yet so far away amazing talented teammate of Felipe Massa. Red Bull with a new fiery youngster that's only been in the sport for a few years, of Sebastian Vettel and his very experienced teammate of Mark Webber. And Mercedes with an all-German outfit with the returning ex-retired 7-time world champion of Michael Schumacher and future world champion Nico Rosberg. And throughout the season, we got to see just how close this battle would get, meaning that coming into the final race of the season, we had the standings looking like this. Fernando Alonso on 246 points, Mark Webber on 238, Sebastian Vettel on 231, and Lewis Hamilton on 222. But only one could prevail. Let the race commence. The qualifying left our 4 drivers all in the top 5 heading into Abu Dhabi, with Sebastian Vettel picking up pole position, with Lewis Hamilton right behind him in 2nd place. Then we go back to 3rd with Fernando Alonso and Mark Webber in 5th place. Meaning that even though Sebastian Vettel had the pole position, Fernando Alonso had the upper hand, with him easily winning the championship in 3rd place. If they stayed on the points they had, technically from qualifying to race, then the results would have been this: Fernando Alonso with 261 points, Sebastian Vettel with 256 points, Mark Webber with 248, and Lewis Hamilton on 240. So we would have seen Fernando Alonso as a 3 times Drivers' World Champion. However, technically 4 people could win. It was more likely that Hamilton was going to become an issue for both Alonso and Webber, as he started ahead of them and he needed basically all of the drivers to DNF for him to win. And his teammate of Jenson Button starting in 4th also would cause some issues. So realistically, there was the McLaren barrier to Sebastian Vettel that Alonso and Webber really had to push through. The start of the race went extremely well for Sebastian Vettel, with him leading into the first corner and out of the first lap. However, it was a very close call, with him almost clipping Hamilton's front wing, potentially taking out both of them. However, they both got away and they both came out with Vettel 1st place, Hamilton 2nd. However, further down with Alonso and Webber, Alonso lost his position to Jenson Button, falling down to 4th, which was exactly what Vettel needed, but exactly the opposite of what Alonso needed. And Webber staying in 5th was not good enough for him. Oh, and for people who say the halo isn't needed in F1, well, just let me remind you of what happened on the first lap, which shows just how dangerous F1 can be at times. But this crash from a 7-time world champion with Liuzzi would cause a butterfly effect that would completely change F1, because this brought out the safety car. And what happens under safety cars? People pit. And that's exactly what Nico Rosberg did in the Mercedes, Vitaly Petrov did in the Renault, Al Jaswari did in the STR Ferrari, aka Toro Rosso, aka AlphaTauri, aka VCarb, aka Red Bull sister team, aka Red Bull Juniors, and a lot of back markers followed suit as well. A very early pit stop in the race, we get to the point where everyone else on the grid is trying to do pit stops, and Mark Webber is the first one on lap 12. But crucially, he can only pit and come out behind Petrov, and importantly, Alonso, following suit 4 laps later, fell behind Petrov as well. And to put it lightly, this would be an issue for both Alonso and Webber. Lap after lap, Alonso just could not overtake Petrov. It got to lap 22 and they almost collided, but it just was not happening for Alonso. It looked more likely that he would crash out than that he would overtake Petrov in the Renault. And as a result of being stuck behind the Renaults, it meant come lap 25, Sebastian Vettel pitted, went out to first to second place, basically meaning that he had guaranteed himself a win if he did not crash out of the race, with him coming out miles ahead of any other competitor, with Hamilton at 5th and Alonso and Webber trailing not even in the points yet. But after everyone made their pit stops, it left the grid with Vettel in first place with a significant gap to Lewis Hamilton in second, with Alonso and Webber only in 7th and 8th. Now, because Petrov had pitted on the first lap, it meant that he did not have to do any other pit stops, as in the F1 rules, then and currently now, if it was a dry race, you had to make a mandatory pit stop onto another compound of tyres. So that meant Petrov could go basically from the start of the race to the finish, not needing another pit stop. And you know that little thing I mentioned right at the start with no more mid-race refueling? Well, that also meant that the car was perfectly aligned to push for the end of the race and go for that one stop. So what happened? Exactly what we all thought. None of the midfield drivers ended up pitting again after their first pit stops, and it meant that Alonso and Webber, pitting extremely early, got stuck behind both Renaults of Kubica and Petrov, who ended up after pit stops being 5th and 6th for Renault, which was a brilliant position for the Renault team, but terrible for the ex-Renault driver of Fernando Alonso. And by the end phase of the race, Fernando Alonso still could not overtake Petrov, and with the tyres fading away for everyone, it meant that overtaking was virtually impossible, making a Renault train with the unlucky souls of Alonso and Webber stuck behind for the entire rest of the race. So that meant if it ended as it was, Vettel would win on 256 points, to Alonso in second with 252 points, Webber in third with 242, and Lewis Hamilton in fourth with 240. Going into the final lap, all that Sebastian Vettel had to do to win the championship was to not crash and just cross the finish line.
There is the pit board held out for the final lap for Sebastian Vettel. 10 pole positions, 4 victories. This is going to be number 5 of 2010, and it's going to be the most crucial.
He lost last year's championship. He did have a chance of that, but made some mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes this year and looked like he'd blown it again. But somehow Sebastian Vettel's speeds at 10 pole positions. Every time the safety car comes in, his restarts have been mighty. His confidence, his speed, his commitment, his skill. And he's got to somehow tame and get rid of those mistakes. But even so, it looks like he's got enough.
The order came from Dietrich Mateschitz. It needs to be better this year. We won the championship. Well, they got the constructors in Brazil. And now Sebastian Vettel wins in Abu Dhabi to be drivers' champion for 2010. It's a double for Red Bull.
Thank you, boys. Unbelievable. Thank you, I love you.
Sebastian Vettel, you are the world champion. The world champion. Well done, enjoy it. You are the man.
Yes!
F1 officially had a new Drivers' World Champion, a new Constructors' World Champion, and for a team that at the start of 2010 no one believed could do anything coming into 2010 with too much competition from the rest of the grid, they had just won both championships in F1, starting the incredible journey of what we now know as one of the biggest teams in F1, going on to collect 7 Driver World Championships and 6 Constructor Championships. F1 was never the same. Red Bull had arrived.